We begin today's shiur 7 lines from the top of Daf Nun Daled. We started the new parak at the end of our previous shiur, and the Mishnah set the theme that the kinyan of Yibum, the marital arrangement or the marriage between Yavam and Yevama, is accomplished through intimacy, even if there is no mitzvah intent during that union between surviving brother and widow of deceased brother. The Gemara at this point wants to find sources for that. Hence the Gemara asks, Meno hanimili detanu rabbanan. What is the source of that which was taught, that all kinds of intimacy, even without specific mitzvah intent, are effective in concretizing the Yibum marriage? The pasuk says, Yevamo yavoi aleha, mitzvah. That means that the choice of Yibum over chalitza is the process whereby we release the widow from the restriction or being restricted to the Yavam, and enabling her to marry anyone she should desire. So we choose Bia as the better option, in other words, that the brother-in-law should marry the sister-in-law, over freeing her to marry someone else. Dovar acher, Yevama yavo aleha. Another drosha, another approach to this pasuk is that when the pasuk says the Yavam comes upon her, they unite through intimacy, regardless of state of mind. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'oines, bein b'rotzain. Whether it be unintentional, whether it be with frivolous intent or harlotry in mind, as we call znus, whether it be beyond control or be it willingly. The Gemara asked, how can you take the same pasuk, Yevamo Yovo Alel, and have it serve as a source for these various types of mindset when the pasuk was already used to teach me the mitzvah, the ha'afikte, the mitzvah, which we saw at the beginning of this source, where we said that the Yavam confronted with two choices, either marry her or release her, better to marry her. And that's what was derived from the verse. The Gemara answers, La mitzvah, that particular point of choose Yibum over Chalitza, Mevi'im lo yachboitza ish nafka, where the pasuk presents it as a second choice, that if the man does not want to marry her, then they do Chalitza. Ha'chafetz yibeim. However, if he should desire, which is the first choice, then he should do Yibum. He should have intimacy and thereby acquire her, marry her as his wife. V'chi osokra, the pasuk of Yevama Yavoi Aleha, that is to teach me bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'oines, bein b'rotzon. All the different types of intent or lack of intent are still effective. Tanya idach, we have another Tanaic source. Yevama Yavo Aleha kedarka. V'lokcha equals shelo kedarka. V'yiveim bia gomeres ba v'ein kesef ushtar gomer ba. V'yivma, the pasuk actually says v'yivma with a hey at the end of the word, which we learn bal korcha. So in this source there were a number of different points, and the Gemara will go over these points as we go on in the Gemara. However, the source told us at the outset, Yevama Yovo Alel means that if they cohabit kedarka, with the normal way of male-female cohabitation, in the, we'll call it the style of reproduction, that is effective. And velokha means that even, literally, and he takes her, that indicates even if he has relations with her in the non-procreation fashion through the, we'll call it the other orifice, nevertheless it is effective in creating the Yibum bond, or the Yibum marriage. And V'yibeim indicates that the only method of truly establishing the Yibum marriage is Bia Gomeres Ba. Intimacy is what does it. The Ein Kesef Ushtar Gomer Ba, as opposed to other marriages between regular man and woman that are unrelated to one another, unconnected, where the man offers woman money, or through a document they can establish their marital status. In the case of Yibum, it's on a Torah level, only through intimacy. And the hey at the end of the word, v'yidma, indicates even against her will, even against the widow's will, the Yibum marriage is established. And this, by the way, is in contrast with standard marriage, where the woman has to accept. It can't be against her will. Against her will is known as rape. Omar Mar. Here's a quote from that which we saw above. We have a little arrow on the side with which you can align this quote from where it originally was seen. Davar acher, Yevamo yovo aleha, bein b'shogeg v'chulei, v'ha afikte l'kedarka. Was it not so that Yevamo yovo aleha, we just saw in this most recent source that it was used for telling me that through normal relations they established their Yibum marriage. The Gemara says that point is learned from somewhere else. Hahu milahakim la'achiv shem nafka. The pasuk describes the purpose behind Yibum in order to establish the name or the memory or the continuity of the deceased brother who left no children. So the hope is that through marriage with the surviving brother, the widow will produce children. Lahakim la'achiv shem. And from that we see that Yibum is accomplished b'mokom shemekim shem, through the female bodily orifice through which that becomes possible. And that's what we call bia kedarka. The chiyasa kra, the pasuk of Yevamo Yavo Alel, was, as we saw earlier, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'oines, bein b'ratzon. So as we look over the last few lines of the Gemara, since we're at the beginning of the Shir, so you can see that the pasuk Yevamo Yavo Alel was thought to teach me three different things, when in fact at the end of the day it's only teaching me one point, that is mitzvah. As far as the other limudim are concerned, the bein b'shogeg, actually let me correct that. The true use of Yevamo Yavo Aleha, that is for bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'oines, bein b'ratzon. As far as lemitzvah is concerned, that's from v'im lo yachboitz ha'ish. And as far as kedarka is concerned, that's learned from lahakim la'achiv shem. Gufa, Omar Rav Yehuda. Now, this is a quote from that which we had seen at the end of our previous shir, where Rav Yehuda said, and this is you can see this is a quote from the top line that we, by using the arrow, you can align this with the regular arrow at the top. So Rav Yehuda taught us that in a sleeping state, a man who has a kishui erbo, he has an erection, and he actually bonds in an intimate fashion with the Yevama, but while he is asleep, that does not create a Yibum marriage. Gufa, Amar Rav Yehuda, Yoshein lo kona b'yavimtai. The Omar Kra, the Pasuk says, Yevama Yavoy Aleha, ad de mechavein lo l'shem bia. That the marriage is not consummated unless he has this level of intent, meaning that he has intent for intimacy. As far as what we discussed earlier, all kinds of non-marriage intent, that is not binding. But in all those cases, there was an intent for the act of intimacy. While sleeping, you lack even that minimum level of awareness. The Gemara asks, V'ha Tanya, but do we not have a source that says Bein Er, Bein Yoshein? Whether awake, air is awake, or even sleeping, so that sleeping in that state, it does nevertheless work. The Gemara says, Ema, Bein Eira, Bein Yeshena. the emphasis is on the woman. This is in the feminine form of speech, where even if the woman is asleep, that's not a binding factor. The Yibum marriage is still concretized because he was awake. V'hatanya bein er hu bein yoshen hu bein era he bein yesheno he. Well, in this source, you see both genders are alluded to, and the main problem is from that which we underlined, where yoshen hu, the source is saying whether he is awake or even if he is asleep, it works. So how do we resolve that with Rav Yehuda, who says Yoshein lo kana? The Gemara answers, Hacha b'mayaskino, this Tanaic source that gives credence to a bonding or a marriage while asleep, that's b'misnamne. That's in a state of dozing, not actual full sleep. Hechi domi misnamne. What is how can we describe that state? Omar Rav Ashi, nim tir velo tir. He's dozing. That's nim is to be asleep. So he's asleep but not really asleep. Tir is to be awake but not really awake. Kigon de correlate oni. It's an example of that. Of you call out the person's name and he answers. He responds to hearing his name. But if you ask him something while he's in that state of consciousness, to explain something to you, to say something that requires explanation, he won't be able to do it. But midkaru means to remind him. But if you remind him of something that was said, so that he will be able to do. That's as far as a literal translation is concerned. But for our purposes, what we're describing is a state of partial awareness. Well, if a man is in that partial state of awareness and he conducts intimacy, that is enough. If he's fully asleep, that's what Rabbi Yehuda was talking about. Yoshein loy kana b'yivimto. It doesn't acquire, it doesn't concretize the Yibum marriage. The Gemara, as it goes on, is a new point. Something that had been seen at the end of our previous year. We have a little star to the side of the Gemara text. You can align it with the star above. We also have a topic heading on the side. Nofal min hagag v'niska b'yivimto. A person who had achieved the state of kishui ervo, the male erection, fell off a roof and landed in an intimate position with the Yevamos, who was down at street level. Gufa, Omar Rabba. Nofal min agag v'niska. Person fell off a roof and that resulted in the intimate insertion. Chayav ba'arbo dvorim. The result of that is that there are 4 forms of tort compensation that must be paid, and they're listed. If you just skip 3 words, they're listed: benezek, b'tzar, b'sheves, b'ripui. The brackets, as we just demonstrated, helps to make the reading a little smoother, because the reference to the Arba Dvorim is, as we just demonstrated, with the numbers 1 through 4. Also, before we go on with that, we skipped the expression Ubiyavimto lo kana. We also knew that if he ended up together with the Yevamo as a result of falling off the roof, it does not acquire. In the case of a Yibum marriage, it doesn't cause that Yibum marriage to be realized. So the 4 things that were mentioned by way of tort law: nezek is damage, sar is the pain, shevis is the unemployment, and ripui medical expenses. Avol boishes lo mechayev. In other areas of damage where a person damaged someone else and they experience embarrassment, so a payment is made, compensation is made, that's called boishes. Boishes literally means embarrassment. So they call it the embarrassment fee or payment. In this case, that is not paid. The Omar Mar, ein chayav al haboishes ad shiskavin. It has been said that the obligation to pay for boishes, for paying for embarrassment caused to the victim, is not to be paid until there was some type of intent. Here a person fell off the roof. He didn't have any intention of causing any harm to the person below. So that as a result of damage caused through a situation like this, Boshes is not paid. Because of what the Gemara just said, there's no chiyuv Boshes ad she yiskavin, until there's some level of intent. Amar Rava, niskavin l'hatiach b'koiso v'hitiach b'yavinto lo kona. If a person had intention to, we'll do this sexual act with a wall, and instead of inserting himself into the wall, he ended up inserting himself into his sister-in-law, the Yevamos. Well, that it does not acquire. However, if someone had an intention, lahatiach b'vehema, as unpleasant as this may sound, but that's what the Gemara is describing, someone who has an intention to have some type of intimacy with an animal, and he ends up doing it with the Yevamos, the hitiach b'Yevamos kona. It works. She is acquired. The Yibum marriage is accomplished with that. That is an act of that involves intent to accomplish intimacy. The act done with a wall is not called bia. That's not called intimacy. Might be some kind of other immoral kind of behavior, but it's not an act of bia. We call it a sexual act. However, that which would have been done with an animal, and it turns out that he did it with the woman, with the sister-in-law, since the original intent was with an animal, that is called bia. Echad ha'ma'ara. Now we have a sugya that is quite involved, great amount of detail here, and the topic heading with which we open this Gemara is Minayin lahara min haTorah. Our Mishnah made reference to Echad ha'ma'ara ve'echad ha'gomer. Gomer is to finish off. It's a more complete level of insertion, male insertion. Ma'ara is less. Now exactly what these are, it depends on what opinion we end up citing. There are a number of different approaches to this matter. So the Gemara opens up with this question of from where do we know that hara, that partial contact, is considered, halachically speaking, with almost no exception, there is one exception, but halachically speaking is considered full insertion, full intimacy. The immediate topic is, of course, consummating the Yibum marriage. However, this issue has ramifications, as the Mishnah indicated, with regard to forbidden relations as well. What does one have to do in order to be considered violating on a Torah level? We'll call it the sexual intimacy with a forbidden woman. We say forbidden woman, that will include a woman that is prohibited to the man to the tune of a lav, a negative command, and there are more serious types of offenses that were in the realm of arayas, where the punishment is kores or even possibly court execution. But all of these different cases involve intimacy. What defines intimacy? Let us be a little, we'll be concrete for a moment. Let's say a man kisses a woman. Well, the halacha does not condone a man kissing a woman other than one's wife. As far as other kinds of relatives, there are some that we might accept, overlook, or tolerate, we'll say, but in most cases that would be strictly forbidden. However, to suggest that there's a kores penalty or a court execution based on a man kissing a woman, a forbidden a woman, that's not the case. It's forbidden, whether it's a prohibition on a Torah level or on a rabbinic level. That itself is a discussion that deserves separate attention. But that's not intimacy. That's not say sexual connection. So what defines intimacy is what we are going to be preoccupied with. And we, as we said before, I'm just repeating here that even if it's not a full male organ insertion, nevertheless the avera, the prohibition, is violated, and that, as we said, carries with it all the penalties that we described before, as well as the possibility of establishing a yibum marriage. Note, by way of markings, we have a long point, Omar Ula. We also, by the way, have a little note, a double-starred note. Let's read that note together. Simanu Nekuda Aruka, we have used a long point marking, Laharois Oirech Hachipus Lemokul Ora, Shu Mamshich Ad Omid Beis. We're trying to show the length of the search for a source that partial insertion is considered full-fledged contact. The Gemara, Omar Ula, Minayin La'ara Minator. From where do we know in the Torah that Ha'ara is considered a full form of intimacy? Shinema. Now we have a numbering system, Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and we'll make reference to the different psukim later on in the course of our discussion, so it's important to note how we've highlighted the different psukim. So, Shneimar, V'ish asher yishkav es isha dava, v'gila servasa es mekoira he'era. The pasuk refers to a man cohabiting with a woman while she's experiencing a female blood flow. And in describing that, you see that the word he'ora is used. Nikan la'ara minatora. So from here we see that even something that's not full-fledged sexual insertion is nevertheless considered as such. Ashkecha nida. Well, this pasuk, as we said, refers to the woman experiencing her monthly flow, which we call the nida. So in the case of having relations with her, so the ha'ara form of relations is considered a violation. Sha'arayas minai, from where do I know other forbidden women that the same thing would apply? Now here is a new marking structure. Under the mivneh heading on the side, the trapezoid shape is featured. This is a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a back and forth type discussion. The narrow part of the trapezoid, or volcano shape, when it's facing upwards, that is considered a raya, a proof to what we're seeking right now. And the inverted form, pircha, it's an undoing, a challenge, a refutation. Yesh lehoir, we want to point out, she chipus lemokul ha'ara mamshich haromid beis. The search for this continues till the next Talmud of Gemara. Even though the Gemara in the course of the discussion will highlight 3 psukim, and we mentioned this before, the Sefer Shadavar at the end, however, Kol Arayas Nilmadu Pasuk Aleph, means the first pasuk, Pasuk Shel Nida. After all is said and done, we're going to be learning from the first pasuk, the pasuk that we cited with regard to Nida. Amid Beis HaGemara Tevarer Ma Melamdin Shar Psukim. On Amid Beis, the Gemara will find what the other psukim were actually teaching us. So at this point, we're looking for a source that ha'ara, partial insertion, is considered full-fledged contact with regard to other forbidden women, the other arayas. The Gemara continues, third wide line with the upright trapezoid. Neilaf mini, though you might say, let us learn from Nida, let Nida serve as a precedent. No, Nida cannot serve as a precedent. Ma lenida shekain metama es boyala. The Nida has a stringency that you don't find in other cases, and that is that after, as a result of the intimacy with the Nida, she imposes tuma, ritual impurity, upon the man that entered her. Ela Asya me Eishesach. Let us derive ha'ara by other arayas from the case of what the Torah says about man having intimacy with his brother's wife. Dichtiv v'ish asher yikach es eishes achiv, a man who attempts to bond with the wife of his brother, nida he. Literally, the pasuk says she is a nida. Well, that means she's a menstruant. V'chi eishes ish achiv le'olam nida he. Is that true that one's brother's wife is always a nida? That's absolutely untrue. Part of the month a woman is nida, part of the month she's not. Ella kenida. The use of the word nida is we'll say it's a borrowed expression. It's to say that the Eishes Achiv, the wife of one's brother, is like a nida. Ma nida bara, just like intimacy with a nida is violated even with the partial insertion. Af Eishes Ach bara. So too, that is the case, and this is an example of other arayas. That's what we think right now, that Eishes Ach, wife of brother, is an example of a forbidden woman, and we learn from the presence of the word nida in that context that ha'ara, just like by actual nida is a violation, so too by other arayas. Challenge, pircha. Ma li Eishes Ach, you can't learn from Eishes Ach. Shekain biyodoi l'rabois. The nature of Eishes Ach, brother's wife, it's a type of relation, type of relative that it's in his power to increase, to multiply. The boy mekadosh v'azil ki alpha. If he should so desire, he can marry 1,000 women, making many Eishes Ach women. The Rashi says, Shekain biyodo. Rashi is a little less than halfway down the Rashi commentary. He says, Shekain biyodo shel odom l'rabois noshim harbe al ochiv be'isur Eishes Ach. It's a kind of relative that can be multiplied. So that is unique to Eishes Ach, as opposed to a mother. One has only one mother. It's not something that you can increase. A sister is something that she is your sister. Person cannot make more sisters. It's not in a person's power to do that. But Eishes Ach, if a man decides to marry more and more women, all of those women that are married to your brother are an Eishes Ach. So it's a different situation, not similar to other arayas. Elo asyo me'achois av v'achois ein. Let us derive that ha'ara is a form of is recognized as a complete form of intimacy from what the Torah says about father's sister, mother's sister. Tichtiv ve'ervas achos imcha ve'achos avicha loy sigale ki es she'ero ha'era. So here we have a pasuk dealing with mother's sister, father's sister, and the pasuk warns against intimacy with them, and the intimacy is described as ha'ara, which is known as partial contact. And through partial contact, one, even if it's partial contact, one will have violated this particular prohibition of achos imoy and achos aviv. The Gemara says, no, I can't learn from the partial insertion over there. Ma la'achois of the achois aim shekain isur haba me'elov. We look at Rashi, shekain isur haba me'elov pshot mino imo v'achoso vito v'chayos b'hem. There are other relatives that become usur on their own. However, v'lo tifshot mino arayis hanesoros lo machmas kiddushin. You can't compare, let us say, these kind of relatives that automatically became your relatives, as opposed to people that became women that became also prohibited to you based on someone taking an initiative. For example, a mother-in-law. How did she become prohibited to you? By your taking the initiative of marrying a woman. Her mother becomes also to you. So you can see there's a difference between the other we'll call natural relatives and those relatives or forbidden relations that are a function of your having taken the initiative. So at this point, we're still seeking out a source for ha'ara by other forbidden women. Mechada lo asya. From attempting to cite as precedent any one of these, we saw nida, we saw eshesach, and we saw achoisimo, achosaviv. From any one of them, I can't derive that hara is a problem by other relatives. And why can I not derive it? So the Gemara pointed out in each case why. What was unique to nida is unique to nida, doesn't apply by the others. What that which is unique to eshesach doesn't apply by the others, and likewise achosav and achoseim, it has its limitation. Teisi chado mitarti. Why couldn't we derive the other arayas, we'll say, by the Torah stating two? Once again, by stating one case of hara, so we saw you can't rely on stating one case, because the one case, whatever one case you cite, will have its unique factor. Why couldn't the Torah state two of them, and from between the two, let us derive the third? Let's even maybe just to say this, to repeat the point in a more accurate fashion. The Torah found it necessary to spell out hara by nida, by eshesach, and by achos eim, achos aviv. Was it necessary for the Torah to spell out hara by each one of them? Couldn't the Torah have written just two cases, and I'll derive the third from that? And that's now what the Gemara continues with. Teisi chada mitarti. Derive one, let's call it the third one, from stating two. Now, third doesn't mean in the order that the Gemara presented, but rather simply by stating two of the examples of hara, the third could be figured out. So, mehei teisi. From which two should I attempt to derive that hara is considered a bia, and not state the third, and it could be derived? So let's try. Let's see if we can accomplish that. Teisi me eshes ach v'achoisa v'achoseim. Let the Torah, as it does, state hara by eshes ach, brother's wife, and mother, father, sister. The sister of mother or sister of father. No, that won't be effective. And by the way, if I state those two, I will. The Gemara is attempting to state those two and leave out hara by nida. So the Gemara says you won't be able to derive nida from them. Ma lahanoch shikein asurim mishum she'er. Those are different because they are relatives that are called she'er. She'er are, we'll say, natural family relatives. You wouldn't be able to derive from them, let us say, a married woman. The prohibition of having intimacy with a woman married to some other man. That she's forbidden, but she's not called she'er. She's not called a relative. So how would I know hara by eshes ish, for example? Ella teisi minida v'achois v'achoseim. Let the Torah write the prohibition of intimacy, even if it's just hara, by the case of nida and by the achosav achoseim, and I would be able to derive others from them. No, the Gemara says ma lahanoch. Once again, I can't derive others from them. Shekain, what's unique to them? Shekain isur haba me'elav. These are prohibitions that come on their own without you having taken any initiative. Nida is the natural bodily function that the woman experiences a blood release on a we'll call the monthly cycle. That's not something that anyone initiated. And likewise, achosav achoseim, you're born into this world where your father happens to have a sister, or your mother happens to have a sister, you didn't do anything to establish that prohibition. That's an Isur Haba Me'elav. There are a host of other forbidden relations, other arayas, that happen only as a result of your having taken the initiative. For example, one's mother-in-law, how did she become usher? Because you did something, you married her daughter. Or if you married a wife and she has a daughter, that's called Bas Bina, or that's called Bita, the daughter of your wife. In order for that girl to become usher, you had to marry her mother. So you cannot rely on Nida and Achosa v'Achoseim as a source for Ha'ara by other forbidden relations. Ela Tesi Minida v'Eishesach. Let the Torah state Ha'ara by Nida and Eishesach, and everything else would be able to be derived from them. Demai Parchis. What is there left to challenge? Any objection that you might raise with one of them, the other one will serve as a response. The Gemara says, "Maskiflo Rav Acha Breid Ravika Ma Lenida V'Eshesach." You can't derive other prohibitions from Nida and Eshesach because there is something unique to them that you don't find necessarily by others. Shekain Ein Lohem Heter B'Chaye Oisran. There is no permission while that which prohibits them is still around. There is no permission for them. We glance at Rashi toward the end of the Rashi commentary. B'Chaye Oisran Kol Zman Shehu Chai V'Hi Shofas. What makes a Eishes Ach Aser, wife of brother? The fact that your brother is alive, his wife is forbidden to you. So, as long as he is alive, she is also, she's forbidden. With regard to the Nida, as long as the blood is flowing, so she is prohibited. Those are examples of people that as long as the element that prohibits them is extant, you have no access to that woman. We continue in the Gemara. Toimar b'yeshes ish. Would you say the same thing with regard to a woman, a married woman? Shekain yesh law heter b'chaye osra. What makes a married woman forbidden to you? The fact that she has a husband. Does he have to die in order for the Eishes Ish to become allowed to you? No. If he divorces her, so he is still around. So Eishes Ish is a case of an individual. The woman has a heter. She is accessible b'chaye oisra. When that man, the husband, is still alive, if he divorced her, you can marry that woman. So the case of, by stating Ha'ara, by Nida and Eshesach, won't allow me to derive that Ha'ara would be a problem by Eshes Ish. Omar le Rav Acho midifti l'Ravina. We have a starred note that we ought to read together on the side of the Gemara. Hasimun kan mar'eh sha'pircha nidcha ubekach yesh tzorach l'sagnein ha'pircha acheres. What the Gemara does right now is it's going to challenge the most recent inverted trapezoid. Atu nida v'eshesach b'chaye oisran hu de'ein lohem heter aval la'achar mikan yesh lohem heter. The way the Gemara had structured its pircha to the most recent suggestion of deriving from Nida and Eshesach, the language the Gemara used turns out to be inaccurate. How did the Torah describe the unique prohibition that you find by Nida and Eshesach, that they are prohibited b'chaye oisran? leaving room for you to think that after Oisron, they would be allowed. That's not true. Atu, let's read this in the Gemara again. Atu nida v'yeshesach b'chaye Oisron hu di'en lameter avalachar mikan yesh lameter. Is that accurate to that which you implied before, that nida and eshesach are usher only when the forbidding factor is extant, but when the forbidding factor is gone, they would be allowed? That's not true. What's the forbidding factor in the case of the nida? The blood flow. Are you telling me that when the blood flow stops, she becomes muteres? That's not true. Nida, we continue at the top of Omid Beis, b'yoyim Italia milsa. Nida and her permission is dependent on days. Let's illustrate that. When the woman reaches her monthly cycle, she might have 1 day of actual blood flow. The blood flow made her usher, but she remains prohibited not only on the day of the blood flow, but for the next 6 days as well. She is usher for 7 days. That's b'yoyim. With the passage of days, Talia Milsa, the issue is dependent. So that even if the oser, the prohibiting factor, which was the blood, stops after 1 day, she remains usher. Likewise, Eishes Ach. We speak about the brother's wife. Is it really accurate to say that the brother's wife is forbidden only when your brother is alive? That's not accurate. Even if your brother dies, but he happened to be a man that had children, if your brother died leaving children, his wife remains usher. So that if your brother was the answering factor, just removing him from the scene doesn't make her muteres. And that's what the Gemara means here at the top when it says Eishes Ach B'bonim Talia Milsa. Her permissibility is totally dependent on whether he leaves children or not. Of course, if a brother died leaving no children, so then brother's wife becomes mutter. But if he left children, she remains forbidden even after the prohibiting factor, namely one's brother, dies. So if you want to make the case that you cannot learn from Nida and Eishes Ach, you have to state things differently. Ella porach hachi. You would state the pircha as follows: Ma lenida. The pircha is the undoing of Nida and Eishes Ach as serving as precedent for ha'ara. How would I undo it? How would I undo them as the precedent setter? Ma lenida ve'Eishes Ach shekain ein oisron matiran. Toimar ve'Eishes ish she'oisra matira. In the case of Nida and Eishes Ach, whatever was the forbidding factor, that does not cause permissibility. However, in the case of a married woman, what is the element that creates her prohibition? The fact that she's married to a husband. That very man, that husband, we'll call the restricting factor, he causes her subsequent permissibility by giving her a divorce document. So I can't assume that ha'ara is a problem just because it's stated by Nida and Eishes Ach and transpose that or replicate that upon the case of Eishes Ish, for example. Ella Omar Rav Yona Vitema Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua Omar Kra. Rav Yona, some versions have Rav Huna saying let's derive from the following pasuk. It says, Ki kol asher yaseh mikol ha'to'evois ha'ele v'nichrisu ha'nefoshois ha'oisois. This pasuk appears after the parsha dealing with forbidden women. Hukshu kol ha'arayos kulan l'nida. All what the Torah's intent is to compare, and when we say compare, it doesn't mean through a logical comparison. It's a scriptural comparison. And when you have a scriptural comparison, a hekish, so we don't challenge a hekesh with questions. Hukshu kol arayos kulim lenida ma nida ba'ara, just like nida is considered violated through mere ha'ara, partial contact, af kol ba'ara, so too all others are considered violated through even ha'ara. And so what do we see from this? It was necessary for the Torah to spell out ha'ara by nida, namely the first pasuk that we quoted in this section of Gemara. And that combined with the hekesh, that all other arayas, all other prohibited relations are compared to the case of nida, which was cited in the Roman numeral number 1, I derive the understanding that ha'ara is a problem by all other women. So if that is the source, what am I to do with the other psukim? We have psukim that we called number 2 and number 3. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading. You can see a diamond is featured, and we've written me'achar she'ara nilmada mi nida. Now that ha'ara is derived from nida, ma bo'im shar hapsukim shivu ba'amid aleph l'lamed. What is the purpose of the other psukim that were cited on Amid Aleph? So now the Gemara goes through that. V'ela nida, and we should point out that the double underline features the pasuk, or the main element of the pasuk that we had cited before, so that you see a double underline here, and it's accompanied by the diamond at the end of line Roman number 2, and in the wide lines of the Gemara, fourth wide line, you see again a double underline ha'ara, and followed by the diamond, the case of achosav and achosein. Those were the other 2 psukim. So the Gemara asks, v'ela nida the ksiva gabi eishes ach lomali. Why does the Torah use the word nida in the context of eishes ach? Originally, we thought it was to demonstrate how other arayas, other than menstrual women, hara is also a problem. But I don't need that anymore. I have the hekesh that we cited just beforehand. So what is the role of the word nida in the context of brother's wife? Answer, l'chid Rav Huna, it is for the sake of Rav Huna's teaching, or through Rav Huna's teaching we'll see the purpose. The Omar Rav Huna, and here we just skip the bracketed section because within the brackets the language is not accurate. Rav Huna says, Remez liyevama she'asura b'chaye baila minayin. From where do we know that a sister-in-law is forbidden while her husband is alive? And of course, while he's alive and married to her, so it's clear that she's forbidden. But even if he divorces her, that the fact that she was married to your brother is enough reason for us saying that she is prohibited. So from where do I know that? You notice we have again a bracketed section. These brackets indicate to skip the contained section, and right after the brackets the answer to this question will be found. So we're asking, where in the Torah is there an allusion to a sister-in-law being forbidden as long as her husband is alive, even if he divorced her? Now notice we go to the first wide line after the brackets. Omar Kra v'ish el asher yikach es eshes achiv nidahi. The pasuk says, a man who takes his brother's wife unto himself, well, she's a nida. V'chi eshes achiv nidahi. This is, by the way, a long answer marking you can see we have here. Is that pasuk accurate, that your brother's wife is necessarily a nida, a menstruant woman? Ella kenida. Rather, it's a word that's positioned in the pasuk for the purposes of analogy. We say that Eishes Achiv, one's brother's wife, is like a nida. Ella kenida. Ma nida af al pi sheyesh la heter le'achar mikan. Even though after a while, after the prohibition period passes, she becomes muteres. B'shas isura b'kores. when she is forbidden, when the 7 days have not lapsed. If a man has intimacy with a nida, he is guilty of kores. Af eishesach nami af al pi sheish la heter liachar mikan. Even though a brother's wife could be muteres afterwards, when if the brother dies, let us say leaving no children, so she can become muteres. B'chaye baila b'kores. While her husband is alive, she is punished. She is the source of a kores penalty, and we indicated that means even if the one's brother divorces his wife, but he's still around, she is also to the tune of kores. So that's what I learned from the word nida in the case of Eishesach, brother's wife. Now, in the course of this Gemara, as everyone noticed, we skipped a couple of sections, so we have to go back over it. What we did accomplish is to read the Gemara in its full, final version without encountering the inaccuracies. Let us go over the Gemara again now. The Gemara we're going back to where the double underline appears under the word nida. V'ela nida deksiva gabi eishesach lomali. So the Gemara answers, L'charav Huna, I need it for Rav Huna's teaching. The Rav Huna, remez liyavama min torah minai. Where is there a hint in the Torah to the mitzvah of yibum? So the Gemara asks, what kind of question is that? Minayin? From where is there a hint? Haksiv yavama yavo aleha. There's an explicit pasuk that says that if one's brother dies leaving a widow without his leaving having had no children, so you, the surviving brother, are to take her. That's an explicit pasuk. It's not some type of hint to it. So what's the role of nida written by Yeshesach? Ella, rather, remez liyavama shasura b'chay baila minayin. From where do we know that the yavama, the sister-in-law, is usher while her husband is alive? And we pointed out that means that even if your brother divorced her, she remains usher. From where do we know that? Now, in the brackets, we have some markings on the side. We have a tat no say, that's subtopic heading. Din shel Rav Huna, remez li yavama shasura b'chay baila im girsha achiv minayin. Then you can see that we've used a dashed underlining in the Gemara. You'll see this. Havlotas abitui b'chaye baila tezu ikar hadiyun. We're going to be highlighting that expression while her husband is alive. That's the main aspect of this discussion. The triangles that appear are a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track. Halos efshorus lilmoid ha'isur mi svara. The triangle pointing up is where the Gemara tries to show that you can learn this prohibition through logic. The inverted triangle is a dechiyasa, is a rejection of that. So right now we're focusing on from the issue of from where do we know that a sister-in-law is usher as long as your brother is alive. So the Gemara answers, Hi, svara he. I don't need the pasuk of nida. I could figure that out from a svara. Midama rachmana, from the fact that the Torah says the achar misas bailo sharia, that upon the death of her husband she is mutter. Of course, if the husband, in this case your brother, left no children, so michlal the b'chay bailo asur, we can infer from that, from the very parsha of Yibum, that as long as the brother is still alive, she is prohibited. And as we said, even if he divorced her. The Gemara rejects this. Vidilma, as far as if you're going to focus on logic, I can suggest an alternative form of logic. Vidilma, li'achar misas baila, mitzvah. B'chay baila, rishus. Maybe there is of course room for making a contrast between chay baila and after his death. Maybe things are as follows: that after his death So the Torah says there's a mitzvah while he is alive. Rishus, it's something that's optional. Maybe she is allowed on an optional basis. Inami li'achar misas baila in b'chay baila lo, or possibly it's true the Torah says that after the brother dies, you can marry your sister-in-law, his widow. That's true. To derive the prohibition while he's alive, you have to employ inference. So it could be that the approach to the pasuk is that after the husband dies, after your brother dies, the wife is muteres. When he is alive, she is not. The wife, she might be a divorcee, she's not alive. So we're inferring the negative from the positive. The positive meaning, after his death, you should marry her. While he's alive, do not marry her. The lav habo michlal asay equals asay. A negative that is derived through the positive, through inferring from the positive, legally speaking, it's categorized as a positive command. And as such, there would be no correlate to it. So that if you're going to tell me that nida written by Eishes Ach is to come to the conclusion that while he is alive, so the wife is forbidden, but when he dies, she is muteres, that method of deriving things would not be effective, because the result is that she would be only a positive command. A negative, that which is negative derived from positive has the status of positive, and that would not reflect kores, which in fact is the punishment associated with Eishes Ach. Therefore, Omar Kro, I need a pasuk to tell me this. The Isha Shirikach is Eishes Achiv Nida Hi. V'chi Eishes Achiv Nida Hi. The pasuk says that when you take your sister-in-law, your brother's wife, well, she is a nida. Is that necessarily the case? Ella kenida, rather, she's like a nida. Ma nida, afal pi sheyesh la heter li'achar mikan, b'shasi sur b'koris. The nature of nida is that even though eventually she becomes allowed, but when she is prohibited, she's prohibited to the tune of a kores. It's a very high-level violation to have relations with a nida. Af Eishes Ach nami. So too, the same can be said about Eishes Ach. Afal bi sheyesh la heter le'achar mikan. Even though one's sister-in-law could become muteres after one's brother dies, b'chaye bailo b'kores, when he is alive, so she is strictly forbidden, and not only that, but could be punished by a brother-in-law having relations with his sister-in-law, even if she was divorced from his brother, carries with it a kores penalty. So with this understanding, with the din of Rav Huna, I understand the role of nida by Eishes Ach. In simple terms, the role of nida by Eishes Ach is telling me something specific to the realm of Eishes Ach. It's not like we thought earlier that it would serve as a source for ha'orah by all kinds of other forbidden women. V'ela ha'orah d'ksiva gabi achos av achos aim lomali. Once we said that the status of ha'orah is derived from the case of nida, and the fact that the Torah compares all other forbidden relations to nida, why does the Torah trouble itself to use the word ha'orah by achosav and achosaim? Achosav is one's father's sister, and achosaim one's mother's sister. Answer: Lichadava minei Ravina Mei Rava. The answer to this question is revealed through Ravina's question that he poses to Rava, and the Gemara will explain itself as we go on. Hama'ara bezochur mahu. Ravina asks Rava, what would be, and this is a homosexual relationship, so one who does ha'ara b'zochur. So is that really what Ravina is asking of Rava? B'zochur mishkevei isha ksiva. The Torah says that, or describes homosexual relations as mishkevei isha. And that means, just like intimacy with a woman is something that is accomplished, can be accomplished, and in most cases it's quite forbidden, so too with regard to the male male couple. So that once we've established that ha'ara is a problem by women, so it will be a problem by two men as well. Elo hama'ara b'vehemo mahu. What about ha'ara done with an animal? If homosexuality is not disgusting enough, then this is all the more horrific. But halacha has to deal with it. If a person does ha'ara with a behema, what is the din? Omar lei, Rava answers, in Eino Inyan La'Ra Tiksivo Gabi Achosav Achoseim, if there is no real purpose in writing ha'ara by Achosav and Achoseim, by one's father's sister or mother's sister, the Asya Behekesha Midu Rabbi Yonah, as far as ha'ara as being a problem by Achosav and Achoseim, that's derived through the Hekesh that Rabbi Yonah introduced above. So what does ha'ara do scripturally when it's written by Achosav and Achoseim? So Teneu Inyan La'ara de Behema. Then have ha'ara that's written by Achosav and Achoseim reveal that ha'ara with a behema is something that is forbidden. As far as ha'ara with Achosav and Achoseim themselves, that is understood to be usher even without the fact that ha'ara is written by them, but by virtue of the fact that they're compared to all other relatives, as we saw above in the name of Rabbi Yonah. So what we have seen is that the word ha'ara written in the Torah by Achois Av and Achois Ein is the source of ha'ara by behema. And if a person would have a partial insertion with an animal, he would be guilty of bestiality. The Gemara asks, Michti, behema equals chayve misois beis din hu. A man who engages in bestiality is subject to court execution. My taimo ksiv leha'ara dida gabi chayve krisus. Why does the Torah write the reference to bestiality in the context of a forbidden relationship that's not punishable by court execution? Namely, father's brother, that's father's sister, mother's sister. Those are chayve krisus, punishable only by kores. Lichtoiv gabi misos besdin. Let the Torah have written ha'ara by some other like example of misas besdin, some other punishable offense by court execution. V'neilif misas besdin mi misas besdin, and then I would be deriving something else, namely ha'ara by behema, from something of a similar nature, another misas besdin. The Gemara answers, Aidi dekule kra ledrasha asi, kosiv be nami ha milsa ledrasha. Since the whole pasuk concerning Achos Av the Achos Ein is, we'll call it a superfluous pasuk, an extra pasuk, and its presence, its entire presence is for drasha purposes, for expansion into other matters, so too this as well. My drasha. What is the drasha that was just referred to? On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei topic heading, Achos Av She'asura. When we speak about the father's sister as being prohibited, Dafka Shehi Achos Aviv Min Ho'av, is it when she is a father's sister because of their having a common father? Only Gam Im Hi Achos Aviv Min Ho'aim, or is there a prohibition of father-sister even if they have only a mother in common? So in the larger picture, we're talking about our interest in knowing about the grandparent. A person's son is having, in this case, relations with his father's sister. How is it his father's sister? Is it because the father and his sister have a common father, or even if they have only a common mother, that would be enough? That's what the Gemara is going to analyze. The Gemara continues. My drasha. What is the drasha? We said that the pasuk of Achos Av and Achos Ein was for drasha purposes. So let's see, what is that drasha? The Sanya. Now here we open up with a pasuk from Parshas Yevamos. That's Vayikra, Perek Yud Ches. We should note, just by the way, that when we made reference on Nun Dalam and Aleph, meaning on our previous Omid, to the prohibition of Achos Av and Achos Ein, we were referencing a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Chof in Parshas Kedoshim. So the pasuk in Yevamos says, Ervas Achois Avicha Lo Sigale, and the Brisa opens up with a deliberation. Are we to understand Bain Min Ho'av, Bain Min Ho'aim, that it's a father's sister, whether it be from a common father or a common mother? Ata oimer Bain Min Ho'av, Bain Min Ho'aim, o Eino Elo Min Ho'av V'lo Min Ho'aim. Or maybe it's a sister because your father and this woman have a common father, but there wouldn't be a chores penalty if all they had was a common mother. In order to illustrate these family relations, we have a little diagram on the side where we indicate Achos Aviv. So you can see where we've circled the word Achos, those are sisters, and in the middle there's an Av, a father, and under that you see Ben. So we're interested in defining the prohibition between that Ben and his father's sister. On the one hand, you can see a father's sister because they have a common mother. That's on the right hand side. That's an Achos Min Ho'aim. On the left hand circle, that's a father's sister because they have a common father. So now let's continue with trying to resolve this. V'dinhu. Dinhu indicates let's apply logic. Chiev kan, the Torah is mechayev on father's sister here. V'chayev ba'achoso. One is also guilty if he has relations with his own sister. Ma achoso Bain Min Ho'av, Bain Min Ho'aim. Just like one's own sister, she is forbidden whether you have a common father or you have only a common mother with her. The Rashi quotes the pasuk for one's own sister. It says Bas Avicha Oi Bas Imcha. So just like one's own sister, it is forbidden whether it's from a common father or even from a common mother. So afkan bein min ho'av bein min ho'em. So too when it comes to father's sister, the same applies. Oy klach l'derech zu, or maybe go in this direction. Chiyev kan v'chayev b'doidosai. The Torah is mechayev, tells us there's an issur, there's a prohibition of father's sister, and the Torah also tells us a prohibition known as doidoso. What is doidosoi? Doidoso is the wife of one's father's brother. So it's the wife of one's father's brother. That particular prohibition applies only, you'll see, if it's a father's brother from a common father, not from a common mother. Ma doidosoi min ho'av v'lo min ho'em. It's the wife of one's father's brother, but only if they have a common father. But if it's a father's brother because they have a common mother, then the wife of that brother would not be prohibited on the grounds of doidosai. Af kan, so just like we say by dodoso, it's because they have a common father and not a common mother. Af kan, so too when it comes to father's sister. By the way, not to confuse father's sister with father's brother's wife. They're two different women. So too when it comes to father's sister, maybe mino avalo mino aim. So we continue, next stage of analysis. Nira lamidoima. Let's see to whom the issue of father's sister is more similar. Donin isur habo me'elov me isur habo me'elov. Maybe we should derive a prohibition that comes without anyone taking initiative. In other words, a father's sister is an isur habo me'elov. Your father didn't have to do anything to make her usur. And I'll derive that from the din of achosa, your own sister. You didn't have to do anything to make her usur. Just the fact that you were born and she was born, that's it. The al tochiach dodoso, and don't let the case of dodoso prove the matter of father sister. That's different. She'ein isur habo me'elov. Dodoso is not an automatic prohibition. She is forbidden only because your father's brother took the initiative of marrying her. It's an issur that comes through hiddushin, through marriage, and not through simple automatic family relations. So, according to this approach, I'm going to learn father's brother from your own. Let me correct myself. We're going to derive father's sister from the rules that apply to your own sister, and that would tell us bein min ho'av, bein min ho'em, whether it's common, there's a common father, or even if there's just a common mother. Oy klach l'derech zu, or maybe let us apply different logic. Donin kroivei ho'av mi kroivei ho'av. Let us derive rules regarding father's sister, which is a relative of father, from other known father's relatives. Your father's brother's wife. Dodoso. The al tochiach achoso shekrovei atzmo. And do not allow achoso to prove the matter, because that's your own relative. She's related to you directly, not because it's a relative of your father. Talmud lomar. So as a result of logic, you see that we made no progress, because each time we were saying that you could look at it this way, or you can look at it that way. Therefore, we need a pasuk to settle the matter. Talmud loimar. And here we have a pasuk from Parshas Kedoshin. The pasuk we cited on Amid Aleph, where Ha'ara appeared. It says, Ervas achos avicha lo sigaleh. And from this we say, Bein min ho'av, bein min ho'em. so that your father's sister, even if they have only a common mother, that's enough to create the prohibition. Ervas achos imcha lo sigaleh. And here's another relative, a new relative, your mother's sister. You shall not have intimacy with her either. Bein min ha'av, bein min ha'em. The mother's sister is prohibited whether it's a sister because they have a common father, or even if they have just a common mother. The Gemara asks, Lama li lemichteva ba'achos av, lama li lemichteva ba'achos em. Why does the Torah have to spell out that, we'll say, parent's sister is prohibited, and has to spell out by both father's sister and by mother's sister? Omar Rabbi Avo, Srichi. I need them to be spelled out. The Ikos of Rahmona ba'achos av, had the Torah written only father's sister, Shekain yesh lo chayis, because family association is determined by father, and that's based on a pasuk. If you see right across from here, Rashi cites this pasuk. Yesh lo chayis de mishpachas av kruya mishpacha. The word mishpacha, if you translate it as family, so it's only father's family that is titled by the term mishpacha. Dechtiv vaysyaldu al mishpachoisam leveis avoisam. So, had the Torah informed me of the prohibition of father's sister, I would have thought that that is the only parent sister that's prohibited. But mother's sister, maybe not. Emolo, I would say not. It's not prohibited. The Ikos of Rahmona ba'achos em, had the Torah written that one's mother's sister is prohibited, Shekain vadoyis, because you can know with certainty who your mother is. People can be witness when you are born and coming forth from that particular woman. Avol achois av emolo. No one can know with certainty that one's father is in fact one's father. So the sister of that man, of what you think is your father, maybe she's not. Sricha. Therefore, the Torah has to tell me, even by father's sister is also prohibited. Now we focus on the relative known as dodaso, one's father's brother's wife. She was referenced above. You can see we have a little star that you can connect this where we saw it earlier. The dodaso, the pshita latana, the minoav v'lo minoaim minole. We said above in the brisa that dodaso is a problem. Father's brother's wife is a problem only if it's the wife of one's father's brother, because they have a common father, not a common mother. How does the Tana, the author of that Tanaic source, know this? Omar Rava, Asya doidoi doidoi. There's a word comparison that leads us to this conclusion. Sivacha ervas dodo gila. That's what it says regarding the erva of doidaso. Uksiv hasam. It says elsewhere. This has to do with this other pasuk has to do with a Jew that had been sold to a Gentile family to be enslaved to them. The Torah speaks about his being redeemed, that the Jew's family redeems him from his servitude. So it says in that context, Oy doidoi, oy ben doidoi, yigoleno. Whether it's dodo or it's ben dodo, redeem him from his servitude. Ma lahalon mino avlo menaim, just like in that parsha, in that section that deals with redemption from servitude, it's a relative because they have a common father, not a common mother. Afkan min ho'av v'lo min ho'em. So too in the case of arayas, in the forbidden relations, it's a wife of one's father's brother because they have a common father, not because of a common mother. The Hasam in Olan, And there in the parsha of redemption from servitude, how do you know that those relatives of Dodo, which is a father's brother or father's brother's child, it's because your father and he have a common father alone and not common mother. And how do you know? And there, how do you know that? Omar kro mi mishpachtoi yigolenu. That has to do with a member of one's mishpacha will redeem him. And we know mishpachas av kruya mishpacha, mishpachas aim eino kruya mishpacha. And that we saw before in the Rashi that we read, where it said the mishpachaisam leveisavoisam, that the concept or the institution of mishpacha is when it's from your father's side, not your mother's side. V'hodesnan, we have a Tanaic source that presents a case dealing with achos ishto, one's wife's sister. Since we're discussing sisterhood, so now we'll talk a little bit about one's wife's sister. The case itself will be self-explanatory as we go on. Amrulo, a man was informed, Mesa ishtacha, your wife died. V'nasa achosa me'aviha, and you went and had married your wife's sister. That your wife and this woman have a common father. Two women born from common father but different mothers. Mesa, then he was told she died. V'nasa achosa me'ima, and then you married her sister that have together a common mother. Mesa v'nasa achosa me'avia, and he was informed she died. He went and married her sister from a common father. Mesa, and then he was told that she died. V'nasa achosa me'ima, and then he was and then he went and married her sister through a common mother. And now the main aspect of this story is not in the words, but you have to, and we wrote it between the lines. They then informed him that all the women are alive. To appreciate this, Rashi explains in detail with names the example. We have a little chart on the lower part of the page. You can see numbers underneath women's names. Milka, Rivka, Sarah, Cheved, and Dina. Those are women 1 through 5 that a man marries. So a man had married Milka, and he was informed that she died. He then went and married Rivka. Now Rivka and Milka have a common father. That's Achosa me Avia. And then when he was informed that Rivka died, he went ahead and married Sarah. Sarah and Rivka have a common mother, and so on and so forth. Then it's revealed that all the women are still alive. The Brisa goes on, Muter borishona ubishlishis ubichamishis. He is allowed to remain with Milka, Sarah, and Dinah. Those are numbers 1, 3, and 5. You'll notice if you concentrate on the chart that lady number 1 and number 3 are not related to one another whatsoever. So he had married Milka and she's still alive. There was nothing preventing him from the outset of ever marrying Sarah. The marriage to Rivka never took effect because Rivka was Malka's sister. You can't marry your wife's sister. But the marriage to Sarah was legitimate. The marriage to Yocheved was not legitimate because she is Sarah's sister. But Dinah was okay. Dinah is not related whatsoever to Sarah. The Brisa goes on to tell us, Upotros Sorosehen, and Rashi explains this on the bottom line, Upotros Sorosehen, Imes v'choltzu ho'achim la'achas mehen, Potros Sorosehen. on the chart we don't have the man that married them, but if that man who married these women dies, so his brother can do chalitza with one of them, and the rest are released. They're all co-wives of his brother. So that potros soroseh means the chalitza done with one of them will free the co-wives to marry whomever they want. The Osir B'Shni of Revius, and women 2 and 4 in our example are forbidden. As we explained, those are sisters to your wife. V'ein bias achas mehen poteres tzorosa. And in the event that the fellow who married them dies, and he has a surviving brother, and he has relations with 2 or with 4, that will not release the other women from their yibum connection, because the women 2 and 4 are women that the deceased brother should not have married in the first place. There was no tfisas kedushin; they weren't his wives. So the surviving brother who does yibum or intimacy with them is not doing intimacy with his deceased brother's wife at all. V'im bo al hashniya li'achar misos harishona muter b'shniya b'revius. If he would, if let us say that woman number 1 really died, and he then married woman number 2, so that is a good marriage, and he would be allowed to be with Rivka and with Yocheved number 4. And that's what the Brisa means when it says muter b'shniya b'revius upotros sorosein. And as we explained before, if after he legitimately married Rivka and Yocheved, relations by the surviving brother with one of them, or let's say chalitza done with one of them, would release the other. The osir b'shlishis ub'chamishis. After marrying 2, he can't marry 3, and after having married 4, he wouldn't be allowed to marry 5. Now, what do we see in this story? The Gemara continues at the top of Nun Hey Amud Aleph. Alma, we see from this, Achois Ishto, when we speak about one's wife's sister. It could be your wife's sister, Bein Min Ha'av, Bein Min Ha'em, Asuros. Whether it's a sister because your wife and her sister have a common father, or even if they have just a common mother, they are forbidden. You can't marry your wife's sister under any circumstance. Minola. So from where do we know that? Yolif me'achoso. We will learn the din that has relevance to your wife's sister from the din that regards your own sister. Ma achoisoi bein minoav bein minoaim. Just like your own sister is forbidden, whether it's because you have a common father or you have just a common mother. Afkan, so too with regard to wife's sister, bein minoav bein minoaim. Your wife's sister will be also, even if they are sisters only because they have a common mother or if they have a common father. Let us emphasize, even if they have just a common mother. Question: the leilif mi doidosoi. Why not learn the halacha of wife's sister from the halacha of doidoso? Ma doidosoi mino av velo mino aim. We spent time on Nun Daled Amid Beis demonstrating this, that doidoso is one's father's brother's wife. She is a forbidden relative only if it's your father's brother through a common father, not a common mother. Afkan, so too when it comes to your wife's sister, min ho'av velo min ho'aim. So let dodaso be the precedent for wife's sister. The Gemara responds, Mistabro me'achoisei havelei lemelaf. It's more likely that we will learn the din of wife's sister from the din of your sister. Shekain kroivei atzmoi mikrovei atzmoi, because they you have a common, or you have commonality between your own sister and your wife's sister. So just they are your own relatives. They're relatives. They're forbidden through you, not through your father. There's a Rashi, 4 lines from the top, where there's a star appears. Achos isha krove atzmo chashiv la. Your wife's sister is considered your own relative. She machmas atzmo ne'esra olav. She became also because of something you did. Velo machmas oviv, and not something that your father had done. Ulafuke dodosoi, to the exclusion of that woman, the doidosoi, the kroivas oviv he. She is a relative that's also to you, but through your father. Let's continue in the Gemara. Adarabba, the squiggle underlined word at the end of the line, Adarabba, midoidoso havilem. Adarabba means to the contrary. Learn the din of wife's sister from doidosoi. What do they have in common? Shikain dovar al yedei kiddushin midovar al yedei kiddushin. Both of those became also because marriage was done. Your wife's sister is a problem because you married your wife. Your father's brother's wife is also because your father's brother married her. So they have that in common, whereas your own sister isn't a function of marriage. Elo me'eshes ach yalfinon. Rather, we're going to learn your wife's sister from the din concerning your brother's wife. What is the din of your brother's wife? Well, your brother's wife is also, whether it's a brother to you through a common father, or even if it's a brother to you through a common mother. To shikain, what is the advantage of learning from brother's wife, Eishesach, to the case that we are dealing with wife's sister? Shikain, the shikain dover ayadei kiddushin. Both of these relatives have in common that they became usher through the act of kiddushin, the act of marriage, not through mere birth. Ukroive atzmo, and eishesach, it's your brother's wife, is considered your own relative. Like one's wife's sister, it's your own relative, and not through one's father. The Gemara, as it continues, it's a rather long discussion, continues with regard to this new relative called Eishes Ach Gufa Min Alon. When we speak about your wife, your brother's wife, it's your brother, whether you have a common father or even if you have just a common mother. That man's wife, your brother's wife, will be forbidden. And how do we know that? So that will be the Hemshech of the Gemara. So hopefully what we're saying now serves as an introduction, as a lead into the next shiur.